Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. So today, as part of the stream, I thought I'd cover one of these archetypes that was from the past. And today we're covering one that was used by Professor Thelonious Viper in Yu-Gi-Oh GX. Now, his purpose for using this deck and for gaining the energy from all of his students was to power what was in a capsule that turned out to be yugioh. Yugioh was a monster spirit who was faithful to Jaden and thought actually that she'd been mistreated for trying to protect him. And whereas Jaden had actually thought, I'm sending you off into space to try and get you to clear your head and not be as nasty as you were. Professor Viper's aim was to, in exchange for yugioh gaining back her power, for that power to be used in some extent to get his son back. It wasn't his actual bloodline. It wasn't directly that he had a son as such. He found it within the small child within a combat area where all of his colleagues and his had been captured, and whereas he had actually stayed behind to save the baby, he was able to survive and was able to get help and was able to progress within his life. He entered the Dual Academy within the third year and tried to test the students using these biobands, a means of every time they were dueling, he would take a certain amount of energy from those students. He had to be very careful about how he went across doing that, because if he knew, in the case that if he took too much energy from too many duelists at one point, that it could cause it could be a cause for concern from the nurse and from the Chancellor, whom he still had to take some command from. He had to be very aware of that situation, and so there was a point where Adrian Gecko had become very nosy and decided that, he has to duel next. He did actually duel against Adrian, against Chaz Princeton, but Adrian was very clever because he knew this is what Professor Viper's plan was. He requested a duel for duels, which was a tournament where the person who won would end up winning a load of duels just for winning the tournament. So Viper had to reduce it. This is the archetype that he relied on, and it's called the Venom monsters. We don't see too much of this. This was only used in his final duel against Jaden, and his only duel, I've got to say, where he had to kind of fight to protect himself and to try and take as much energy as possible. Of course, at that time, he'd actually lost his protege as well, who was Axel Brody, who had found out what Professor Viper had been doing and had, intended to stop him. And so we're just going to cover these cards. The first card is a normal monster. It's Venom Cobra. It's a level 4 monster, and it's got 100 attack and 2000 defense. It being a Venom monster means it's not affected by the Venom Swamp card, which is the same reason as all the other Venom monsters. They just are protected from that field spell. It has 2000 defense, but it's really weak, and it's the only normal monster that he possesses. No wonder why, because you don't really need it. I suppose they just wanted to add something into the deck, considering that all in all there are only 6 Venom monsters to cover. The next card he's got is Venom Snake. This is a level 3 Earth Attribute Reptile type monster with 1200 attack and 600 defense. The effect is, once per turn, you can place 1 Venom counter on 1 monster your opponent controls. If you activate this effect, this card cannot attack during this turn. I will be going over what the purpose of the Venom counters are later when we actually cover Venom Swamp, but it's very useful, and it's the way the deck likes to run. By doing this, you're generating the counters more easily. The kind of downside and the reason why this is kind of just above the Venom Cobra is because it exchanges for its attack. So you're preventing yourself from attacking in the same way as using its effect. The next card is Venom Serpent. This is a level 4 Dark Attribute Reptile type. Level 4 with 1000 attack and 800 defense. Its effect is, once per turn, you can place one Venom counter on one monster your opponent controls. And the reason this is a slightly higher level than Venom Cobra is, yes, it is slightly weaker in that it's 200 attack less, but it can use the effect to generate the Venom counter without exchanging for its attack. So it can also attack in the same turn, which is very useful. The next card is Venom Boa. This is a level 5 Earth Attribute Reptile type level 5 monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense. The effect, once per turn, you can place 2 Venom counters on one monster your opponent controls. If you activate this effect, this card cannot attack during this turn. For a level 5, its stat lineup is incredibly weak, but we'll wait and see what the counters do. Yes, it has the same effect as Cobra, but instead of placing one, it places 2 Venom counters, which is incredibly useful. And exchanging for the attack for the turn isn't that big of a deal when it's supported with various other cards. This is one of Viper's main boss monsters. It's not the boss monster, but it's the one just penultimate to it. Phenomenon, the King of Poisonous Snakes. It's a Dark Attribute Reptile type level 8 with 0 attack and 0 defense. It cannot be special summoned by another effect monster's effect. This card is unaffected by Venom Swamp. This card gains 500 attack for each reptile type monster in your graveyard. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can banish one other reptile type monster from your graveyard and special summon this card. Okay, so this gives you an idea of what this is meant to do. Firstly, gaining 500 for each reptile type means you don't have to run purely Venom monsters. It can be any reptile types. These work especially alongside reptilians, who can force your opponent's monster's attack into becoming 0, so they become susceptible to battle damage, and doing maximum damage is what this deck tries to do. Alternatively, there are ways of getting reptile-type monsters into the graveyard with Foolish Burial and Snake Rain and various other cards, as well as sacrificing your own with things like Gift of the Martyr and Tribute to the Doomed, if you want to go that far back into old-school Yu-Gi-Oh! The problem of this card is it cannot be special summoned by another effect monster's effect. So you can't use something like Mystic Tomato to get that destroyed and then bring this out. Potentially as well, your opponent, if they can get over this card's initial attack, they can continue to make you banish cards just to keep it out on the field, which means it's only ever going to get weaker. The other thing is that those reptiles that are in the graveyard are just as susceptible. If you can use things like Soul Release to remove those cards from play, even better. You're able to just completely deplete Phenomenon from having any attack points and making itself a weak, very weak monster. Remember, Soul Release can get rid of up to 5 cards, so if that's what you've got in your graveyard, this card becomes a 0 attack monster. For a level 8, it becomes no threat. And then we've got the final monster. This is Venomenaga, the deity of poisonous snakes. It's a level 10 Dark Attribute Reptile type monster with 0 attack and 0 defense. And this is his boss monster. It cannot be normal summoned or set. It must first be special summoned with Rise of the Snake deity. And it cannot be special summoned by other ways except by its own effect. This card gains 500 attack for each reptile type monster in your graveyard. This card cannot be targeted by and is unaffected by spell trap effects and other effect monster effects. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can banish one other reptile type monster from your graveyard and special summon this card. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you place one Hyper Venom counter on it. When 3 Hyper Venom counters are on this card, you win the duel. So this card has its own win condition attached to it. The reason it's the boss monster is a couple of things. For starters, it's higher level than Phenomenon. Usually if you've got a higher level monster, that gets treated as the boss monster. Secondly, it's unaffected by any of your opponent's card effects, be it spell, trap, or monster effects. So that means the only way you can get rid of it is by destroying it by battle, or by doing the same as what you would with Phenomenon and banishing those monsters from the graveyard to prevent itself from resurrecting itself. Of course, if your opponent's able to get enough reptiles in the graveyard, it's really good for being able to get to meet that win condition. It is actually better that the Venom counter attaches to itself rather than to an opponent's monster, because this way it's not a case of that card has to stick around for you to win. It's a case of this has to be protected. And in doing that, that's what makes this card a lot better. So it has to survive and battle through three times to inflict the battle damage. And of course, you could always equip it with something, that unfortunately you do have to kind of watch what you're doing with this card, but generally if you can get set up out, it's a fine card to use. Okay, so the next cards are the spell card Venom Shot. This is a normal spell card, and the effect is activate only while you control a face-up Venom monster. Phenomenon, the deity of poisonous snakes, or Phenomenon, the king of poisonous snakes. Send one reptile-type monster from your deck to the graveyard, and place 2 Venom counters on one face-up monster your opponent controls. So what's really good about this effect is it's like Venom Boa, but actually as a spell card. It's more effective. It sends a reptile from the deck to the graveyard, so if you've got either of the 2 boss monsters out, they gain a further 500 attack points, and one of your opponent's monster has those Venom counters attached to them, which makes them that much weaker. Next, I've kept it you delayed enough with this effect, but this is a key card to the deck. Venom Swamp, it's their field spell. During each player's end phase, place 1 Venom counter on each face-up monster, except Venom monsters. Monsters lose 500 attack for each Venom counter on them, and you destroy a monster if its attack becomes 0 by this effect. So you see the relevance of why Venom Boa and Venom Shot are really good, in that actually by using their effects you deplete your opponent's monster's attack by 1,000 versus the 500 some of the other cards generate. And of course, it's got that Slifer part of its effect where if its attack becomes 0 by this effect, that instantly destroys it. So if you think at each end phase, if you've used Venom Boa as well, that's 1,500 points lost from a standard monster. They're going to have, say, like 1,900, 2,000 attack points, and they're going to have barely any attack points left. By the end of their opponent's end phase, that'll destroy them unless they've used it for something else. And since all monsters have attack points, even things like Xyz monsters, even Link monsters, everything is going to be affected by this card, which makes it so much better than things that work on levels such as area, like level limit, area B, and some of these requirements as well. The next card is Venom Burn. This is a normal trap card with the effect, select one monster with a Venom counter. You can remove all Venom counters from that card and inflict damage to your opponent for each Venom counter removed. Okay, so this is the one thing which is a little bit bizarre for how the Venom archetype works. Most of their damage is done basically either through... It's just basically done through battle. You don't have any other burn effect cards, and unless you can, for some reason, generate a significant number of Venom counters on your opponent's monster, it's not necessarily that useful. It is an option to win, but it's definitely not the best one out there for them. The next card is Ambush Fangs. This is a normal trap card with the effect activate only when a face-up Venom monster you control is declared as an attack target. You can negate the attack and end the battle phase. Then you place one Venom counter on the monster that attacked. Consider this to be something like negate attack because it's really good. It's got that similar kind of effect to it in that it just ends the battle phase completely. By doing that, not only are you placing the Venom counter that will subsequently make that monster much weaker by 500 attack points, then Venom Swamp kicks in, which reduces their attack points by a further 500, putting them within range of either you next turn being able to battle over them, or being weak enough to actually, be destroyed by the effect of Venom Swamp. The next card is Snake Deity's Command. This is a counter trap card with the effect activate by showing your opponent one Venom monster in your hand. You negate the activation and an effect of an opponent's spell card and you destroy it. This is useful if your opponent ever tries to get rid of your Venom Swamp with things like Mystical Space Typhoon or various other cards which are meant to destroy spell and trap cards, because the deck relies so heavily within the Venom Swamp that without that card they can't function effectively. And of course we have Snake Rain. This isn't technically a Venom card because it doesn't have any naming of Venom within it, but it was used to boost up Phenomenon. And its effect is to discard one card. You select 4 reptile type monsters from your deck and you send them to the graveyard. What's really good about this card is you discarding a card as well. So potentially you're getting rid of 5 reptile monsters. That boosts your those 2 boss monsters by 2,500 attack. It also thins out your deck, so you can get rid of cards you might not need for that time being. There is also actually one other card that I should probably mention, and it was used by Professor Viper within the match, and it's this card. It's called Damage Equal Reptile. It's a continuous trap card with the effect once per turn when you take battle damage from a battle involving a reptile type monster, you can special summon one reptile type monster from your deck with attack less than or equal to the battle damage you took. So the more pain you feel, the more hurt you deal, as Professor Crowler would like to say. And that's a reference back to when he was facing Camula, who was the second Shadow Rider. And as a spoiler, I mean, it's not much of a spoiler, he loses to her. It's really quite useful, considering, even Venom Cobra being your weakest. If you take slightly over 100 points of damage, you can still bring in Venom Cobra. Or if you take a sustained amount of damage, you can bring out one of the other monsters. It's best actually to bring out Phenomenon, because he can only be can't be brought out by an effect monster. He's perfectly fine to be brought out by either a spell or a trap card, so it's not an issue there. And that's probably the best way to kind of interact with that card. So what do you think of the Venom archetype? Is that something you've looked at? Are you a fan of it? Would you like to see more support? As we go on, hopefully, Lightning Overdrive has given so much back support for so many different archetypes. Even some of Chaz Princeton's, Arm Dragons have received that kind of support. Maybe down the line, Cloudians, Venom monsters, some of those that have been ignored will get that support. We can only hope to see this in the future. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe. Please make sure to donate, because it's to help a very good charity, and I don't think this is mentioned as heavily as some certain other charities, and I'm just trying to support them as much as I can. And thank you. Make sure to stick around for the live stream, because I just want to make sure you have a nice Christmas. I will admit I am on my own, and I will be lonely on that day. I'm filming this a separate day. I'm filming this 2 days in advance. But I will be quite lonely on my own, and I've not got any family in the immediate area, so I'm going to be live streaming all day, making sure you guys are fine, checking in with you, and hopefully you'll do the same with me. Make sure just to like the video as well, share it, and I'm grateful for everything you guys can help with. Thank you very much.